But let's start with remembering the real cost. You know, one of the greatest days of my life happened one day in 1991 on my way to Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I was thinking about it tonight. It was a day that had been followed by 5 years of hardship for my new bride and myself. We had gotten married, both of us growing up in big Catholic families, and of course, the obligation of newlyweds in a large Catholic family is one thing. And for my brothers, they turned them out like clockwork. But for us, it was different. And this side of eternity, I'll never really know why. But we struggled in the way that young couples sometimes do. Literally millions of young couples across this country struggle with unexplained infertility. There's a fancy word for it. What it really means is heartbreak. It comes quietly in young homes every 30 days or so, and disappointment. My wife and I went through that, and we had the tests, and we had the procedures. And I have to tell you, just by way of being transparent, I gave up on it. Must have been somewhere 3-4 years in, but my wife Karen, who's Kathy knows, has actually served on the National Right to Life board. She never did. Never gave up. Anyway, fast forward to that day in February. I was driving to Fort Wayne, Indiana. I was running a public policy group that was based up here back then. And we were waiting to hear one more time about one more test. I pulled over where there's now an Arby's there at that Marion exit. You know where I'm talking about? Off 69. It's the dingiest little gas station I ever saw in my life. I walked in, and for you young people, you won't know what this was, but I looked for a pay phone. Wow. And I popped a quarter into it to make a collect call back to our house. Braced myself for what had become our routine for years. And she said, "Happy Father's Day." And the result of that moment, 18 years old, is sitting right over on that front row right there. My son Michael is with me tonight. But in that moment, that to me meant, what is that moment? And it's to that moment we must repair all of America again. We must receive life in this country again with joy whenever God brings it to our families and our lives. But let's speak about the time in which we live from the standpoint of policy, and then I'll close. Let me say with a heavy heart what I've said before in other venues. You deserve to know tonight. This administration is the most pro-abortion administration since Roe versus Wade. Since virtually his first day in office, our president has sought to expand public funding for abortion at home and abroad. The pursuit has been relentless. The day after pro-life Americans marched in Washington, D.C., to remember the 36th anniversary of Roe versus Wade, I was there. The bishop was there. The president rescinded the Mexico City policy, making available millions of dollars of taxpayer money to foreign entities that promote abortion as a means of birth control. President Obama also directed the Secretary of State to fund the United Nations Population Fund, despite its involvement in China's one-child policy and forced abortions. Also in the past year, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services announced its intention to rescind the Bush-era conscience regulations designed to protect health care providers from discrimination due to their opposition of participating in abortion. Rushing forward with their agenda, President Obama has issued a directive to the National Institute of Health to require expanded taxpayer-funded embryonic destructive stem cell research. The decision is currently being considered by the courts, but federal funding of research that destroys human embryos in the name of science will continue because of this administration. And as if this is not enough, the FDA has issued an order that the morning after pill, which can work as an abortifacient, be given to 17-year-old girls without requiring prescription or parental consent. Make no mistake about it. We are facing the most aggressive onslaught against the preborn ever seen in our country. While the majority of Americans in survey after survey claim that sanctity of life as their position, our national government is doing everything possible to advance a culture of death in this country. And that must end, and it must end now. The time has come for action. And what is that? Well, job one, first and foremost, would be to recognize that their government takeover of health care provides public funding for abortion for the first time in American history, and it must be repealed lock, stock, and barrel. If on that basis alone, then so be it. In fact, we must work to support legislation that will reaffirm the historic ban on public funding of abortion, enshrine the Hyde Amendment's language back into the center of American public policy at home and abroad. We must restore the Mexico City policy for foreign aid, and we must deny funding to research that destroys human embryos in the name of science. And let us say here and now, it is simply morally wrong for the largest abortion provider in America to be the largest recipient of federal funding under Title X. The time has come to deny any and all funding to Planned Parenthood of America, once and for all. We must not be silent when great moral battles are being waged. America's darkest moments have come when economic arguments have trumped moral principles. We would be wise on a night like tonight, having been challenged by Bishop Darcy's powerful words, to remember those of another moral leader, the admonition of Mother Teresa, who said, and I quote, "Any country that accepts abortion is not teaching its people to love, but to use any violence to get what it wants." Close quote. The principle is simple. As we look at a rising tide of violence, particularly among our young, as we look at a rising tide, however unreported, of suicide among our young people, we must recognize that the antidote for what ails our civilization will not come from public policy alone. It will come from public virtue, and that springs ultimately from the core of our society. We must again put the sanctity of life at the center of American law and redeem our nation as a result. So there's work to be done, challenges to be faced. But we should embrace tonight what the writers of the Manhattan Declaration wrote in a document crafted by Christian leaders of Catholic and Protestant faith who found common ground in this past year on religious liberty, traditional marriage, and the sanctity of life. They spoke words that ring into our theme tonight of unity. They wrote, "We will be united and untiring in our efforts to roll back the license to kill that began with the abandonment of the unborn to abortion. We will work as we have always worked to bring assistance, comfort, and care to pregnant women in need and to those who have been victimized by abortion, even as we stand resolutely against the corrupt and degrading notion upon which it is based." The The time has come to take our stand, to take action. And Allen County Right to Life is about that business. But there's one thing else we must do. As we inform our neighbors, whether it's a gentle yard sign, or activism, or financial support, or volunteering at a crisis pregnancy center. As we work in public policy to elect men and women who are unapologetically committed to the sanctity of human life, there is one thing more we must do. You know, it was the night before that vote on the health care reform bill. It's a Saturday night. We voted on a Sunday, if you remember. And about 20 of us huddled in what is the very small chapel at the Capitol building, just off the rotunda. Apparently, from our nation's inception, politicians only needed a small chapel to gather. But we went around the horn, and I was struggling to find something to say to sound spiritual. You know? So when it came around to me, I said, "Lord, heal our land." I said that. And afterwards, this congressman from Texas, Louis Gohmert, came up to me, and he said some words that I'll just carry with me the rest of my life, and they convicted me, and I hope they challenge you tonight. He walked up and he said, "Now, Mike," he said, "I don't know if you really noticed, but that verse you was talking about," he says, "it doesn't say if all people will pray. He said it says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and turn, then I will hear from heaven, forgive their sins, and heal their land." Men and women, we hold in our hands and on our knees the power to heal this land. It does not need to be everyone in America to do it. It needs to be those that call on the name, who will bend the knee and turn. And I believe with all my heart, He will heal our land for the unborn and for all who live in this, the greatest nation on earth.